Just that.
Just the added travel plus.
Okay, perhaps since we were amending that one, I can just ask my quick question and I won't have to pull it, if that's okay? And if it's a lengthier discussion, then I'll just pull it and we'll come back to it. But Dos Pueblos High School has listed as one of their fundraisers swim lessons. I just wondered, who is it that gives the swim lessons? And do we have liability coverage for that?
In the past, this has been done with the Dos Pueblos High School Aquatics Club. The persons giving the lessons are certified by the Red Cross. The Red Cross trains them, and they typically submit that proper paperwork to the business office each year.
Okay, that clears it up for me. Okay, were there any others that we wanted to pull, Ms. Lamone?
Yes, D9, please.
D9. Any others? Okay, do we have a motion?
I move to approve the remainder of the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay. Motion to approve the consent agenda except for item D9?
And D9 can be really quick. I need to abstain from the vote.
Okay, okay.
I think we need to go ahead and vote on that. And
Yes.
On the- on
So
my
on the,
motion.
on the motion, yes. So all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, motion to approve the consent agenda without D9 carries.
And I'm going to make a motion to approve D9.
Okay, so motion to approve D9?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions?
Abstention.
Okay, motion carries 4-0 with 1 abstention. Okay, that brings us to the action agenda. Item E1, approval of resolution 2011/2012-17, emergency resolution award of contract, emergency resolution award of contract to Channel Coast Corporation without bidding and advertisement to mitigate mold at Adelante Charter School. Mr. Hetjank, would you like to explain this item?
Yes, thank you, Madam President. As you are probably aware, we have a member of our special projects team whose sole job over an 18-month period that they are getting the stimulus funds is to go through portable classrooms and remove, repair, replace visibly damaged exterior siding. We went through this process at Washington and found some exterior mold, and we've gone through the process at numerous sites. However, at Adelante Charter School in portables 100, 101, 102, and 103, 4 portables, when we removed the damaged siding or siding that was in need of replacement or repair, we did find visible mold. So the first thing we do is we put the siding back on. We call in our asbestos mold consultant, Alan Forbes, and he advises us of a work plan. We don't know the extent of the mold because once we remove the siding and have the contractor there, then we find the visible mold. We go 3 feet beyond all visible mold, do the remediation, and then repair and put the siding back. We don't know the extent if this will require any of the rooms to be vacated because the mold is also on the back of the interior drywall. That's not yet been determined. We met with Adelante Charter School principal today, talked about the project pending board approval, talked about a space where if we had to vacate a room, we have a space for the office or that classroom to go. That's been located. We would have the contractor work weekends when students are not on site. And this is a case, again, where it takes a unanimous vote of the Board of Education and also concurrence with the County Board of Education and via Priscilla Diamond's office and Mr. Cerrone.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hetjank. Are there any questions from the board? No? Dr. Cash?
I just want to comment that this is, I think, a good, strong indication to the community that it doesn't matter where we find a problem, we're going to address it as soon as possible and ask for your permission to do so on an emergency basis if necessary.
Thank you. Then can we have a motion?
I move approval of Resolution 2011-2012-17, emergency resolution, award of contract to Channel Coast Corporation without bidding, and advertisement to mitigate mold at Adelante's Charter School.
Is there a second?
Second that?
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Het-Yonk. Okay, that brings us to item E2, approval of resolution 2011-2012-16, adopting the projected 2011-12 GAN limit and revising the 2010-2011 GAN limit. So, Ms. Jeté, are you?
It has your name on it.
Or Mr. Smith?
So does the
Whoever-
unaudited actuals, but, good evening. The GAN limit, to start off with, it's a resolution, it mentions the attachment in the resolution. I want to point out that the GAN limit is adopted in the unaudited actuals on page 164. That's where the attachment is. Years ago, it wasn't in there. We had to do the calculation separately, but now it's within the unaudited actuals for the past couple years. So basically, I'm asking you to approve the new GAN limit for 11-12 and revision of the 10-11.
And just a
Thank you.
word
Oh.
on the GAN limit. The GAN limit was a result of an initiative passed, Proposition 4, I believe, and it essentially tried to set a limit on expenditures for the state of California. And since school districts are political subdivisions of the state of California, what the state does is accumulate all school districts' GAN limits as their own, as a mechanism of increasing their expenditure limitation. It's rare where we have a situation where we bumped up against it, and generally the state has never bumped up against it, but this is a mechanism of how they actually accumulate, or it's an amalgamation of all those GAN limits to actually increase their spending limitation. And it's, if you've ever done the form, it's incredibly tedious, and the ironic thing is that it was supposed to be a mechanism to reduce government waste, and you can ask Meg how much waste she spent on doing these calculations.
Okay. Yes, Ms. Parker?
Well, I could spend some time ranting about voter initiatives and the unintended consequences and how this is a pro forma waste of time. But I won't. Instead, I'm going to move to approve resolution number 2011/2012-16, adopting the projected 2011/2012 GAN limit and revising the 2010/2011 GAN limit.
Thank you.
I will second that.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 5-0. Okay, so item E3, although it says Michete, it sounded like we're going to have Mr. Smith
Well, it
introduce this item.
My name is actually on this item, Meg and I. The other one just happened to have Meg on it. Thank you.
Uh,
Yeah, on the cover item.
Yeah, it's not on our agenda.
It's not on the
though.
agenda. Well,
No, he stuck that just.
exactly. So what we have before you is the 2010-2011 fiscal year unaudited actuals. As the board knows, the unaudited actuals signify the end of the 2010-2011 budget cycles. It reflects what we've received in revenue, what we expensed in terms of expenditures, and the ending fund balance. What we'd like to do is kind of briefly go through the funds, talk about some of the highlights, and then also we put together, I should say Meg put together, a variance report with respect to how we tied out in terms of the estimated actuals of budget versus what we actually received in income and actually expensed in terms of the actual expenditures. So that'll be the last thing we do. So if you have this book, if you could turn to page let's start with page apparently I didn't put a sticky on that one. Page of five of 190, that's the super summary of the general fund. And I think the board's familiar with the SACS format, which shows you the unrestricted and restricted sides of the ledger and then actual combined. What we're looking at here is you see 6 columns across. You're looking at the first 3 left to right. That's the unrestricted, restricted, and combined for the 2010, 2011 unaudited actuals. And what you see next to it is actually the 11-12 budget. Same format, unrestricted, restricted, and combined. So as you can see, if you look at the total revenues and the total expense, we actually expensed more than what we actually brought in. So we had a structural deficit there of a little over $4.3 million, and that's where it says C excess of a fit or a excess percentage or revenues or expense. I always have a difficult time with the way they phrase it. I call it the structural deficit. That's just an easier way to say it. And as you look over in the budget side, you can see how that's kind of eliminated through both the unification and also the cuts we made. If you flip the page, you can see when you look at revenue versus expense, and you can see an E net increase or decrease to the fund balance, and you can see as you tie down to those bottom pages or those bottom numbers, you can see the roughly $7 million, which is the total ending fund balance, with about 3.7 million of that being the 3% minimum recommended reserve. I probably failed to point out that at the time of the estimated actuals, which was the budget, we anticipated that the ending balance would be about a little over 6.2 million, or about a reserve of 5.2%. We actually ended it at about 5 million, or about, well, actually in reverse, we estimated to be about 5 million, or about 4.3%, 4.03%. We ended up being about 6.2 million, or about 5.2%. So a little bit better, and Meg will go over the variances, why that occurred. If you move over to page 7 of 190, those are just the components of the ending fund balance. We show you the assets and liabilities and how that makes up our reserve. I'm just going to walk you through some of the other highlights in the other funds. If you move to page 17 of 190, this gives you a summary of kind of our restricted ending balances. And remember, we always try and expend our restricted dollars before we actually use our unrestricted dollars, if at all possible, because there's always a premium on unrestricted dollars. This shows you that we don't have anywhere near the kind of restricted ending balances we had in 7, 8, 8, 9. Still have about 2 million, but you remember back in those days we had 5, 7, 8 million dollars. So we're doing a better job, and frankly, it's been whittled down because we've had to use it over time. I mean, there's been a greater reliance on the restricted dollars because there just isn't as much unrestricted money. The next series of pages is the charters, which you'll see starting on page 18 of 190. Unfortunately, the charters are combined, so that doesn't give you a lot of detail. They're all rolled in there and reported jointly. But as we move on to page 31 of 190, Form 12, this shows you your child development. And as you can see, the Child Development Fund is actually doing better than they have been previously. And as you know, they were looked at extensively by the state's Fiscal Crisis Management Assistance Team. There was a series of recommendations, a change in leadership, and I think that's had a dramatic effect on the financial operation of the fund. Similarly, if we move to page 41 of 190, which is the cafeteria, they also have a very healthy ending balance, which you can see on page 42, down under undesignated amount, about $814,000. That's significant. We have a question of whether they'll be able to sustain that over time, but it is something that we're monitoring and talking to them about. Probably the other most significant thing in the unaudited actuals, a lot of the other funds don't have a lot of money in it, but the big exception would be the building fund, and you get to see where we've deposited our bond proceeds. If I can find the actual page 70 of 190. And you can see in the fund balance there, if you go down to D undesignated amount, there's about $39 million sitting there. And that's a result of the bond issuances we had in May, 15 million in the elementary, 25 in the secondary. And, when you net out the cost of issuance and other things, that's where we receipted them and that's where they're reflected. And as you look over into the budgeted side, you see most of those budget for expense. I don't think they'll totally be expensed in 11-12, but they'll be expensed during 11-12, 12-13, 13-14. So those are kind of the highlights as I see them. I'm going to call Meg up to talk about this variance report, which is found on page
14.
Page 14. And what this does is it looks at, on an object, major object detail, looks at the variances between what we projected at budget in what we call the estimated actuals versus how things actually ended up at year end. And Meg's going to walk you through that.
Good evening. We believe it's important that the board sees how well our department estimates our budget. And so this is a little bit of bragging rights, I suppose. This is basically the unrestricted funds only, because in the restricted side, we budget revenue in, expenditures out. That doesn't always happen that way, but as Eric said, that we're burning down our restricted funds, which is a good thing. So I'd like to take you very quickly through the revenue and expenditure sides. As you can see, we did miss our revenue by less than 1%, a little under over 0.5%, which is due to just about a lot of different things. Prior year professional development increases and the net effect of negative state aid and increase in property taxes. But the MAW was right on, and the budget was budgeted too high. The interest was budgeted too high for this year. So with the expenditures, though, we did a really good job on that. I want to point out that the certificated, classified, and the benefits are right on target. It's a total of about $176,000 we missed on those three. So we're pretty proud of that. Also, supplies and services, we budgeted more than we thought than actually happened, because we had the freeze, and you never know how that's going to pan out. So the freeze did really well, as you can see, and conservative spending in the service area. So that brings us down to the ending fund balance. And as Eric said, we had estimated that we were going to have a 4.03%, and it turned out that we had a 5.2%, which is really good. Leaves us with a 1.17% over what we thought we were going to end up with. But I want to caution you on that, because as I do every year, first interim is where we start budgeting for all the carryover, which increases our total expenditures, which increases our 3%, which will eat away at that cushion down there. And so I guess I'm finished bragging about how well we did on our budget.
I think the issue with the salaries and benefits can't be understated. When you're talking about 85% of your budget is salary and benefits, and to be that close on the unrestricted side where, we have to watch that just like a hawk. And then the other issue I thought that was interesting was, I know if Dr. Noel was on the board still, he'd say, well, how much are you going to get from the freeze? Well, we never know, but obviously we did pretty well. But the reason we did well is because we haven't had a freeze in several years, and I think when we actually instituted the freeze, nobody knew it was coming. So, and that's the intent of a freeze. So I don't think it would be very effective this year, so it wouldn't be my recommendation that we implement a freeze, because freezes don't work when they expect, because when people run out and spend, they'll spend before you can institute a freeze. But I think in this particular case, it's not something I always advocate, but it was a mechanism that did well. It did bode well for us this year.
Any questions?
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Ms. Deegan?
First of all, thank you, and terrific job on hitting those numbers so precisely. I think it's really interesting to read this, and I know it's not everybody's favorite thing to read, but it really reads like the year in review, because we see the progress that we've made, and you called out, or Eric did child development and the cafeteria, so we've seen progress there. We saw the results of unification. We also saw the perils of the economy, because we saw money coming in through stimulus that's now gone. And I know a lot of politicians have been saying recently that no jobs were saved or created, but we know they were. So so that's a hardship to see that money go away, and I see in here how it's projected that's going to happen. But by and large, I think, that it shows a lot of really conscientious and hard work. I did have a couple of questions. And let me see if I can find the pages those are on. Well, let's start on 4 of 190, where we have excess program revenues. And this is tied into the GAN piece that I think we just voted on. But could you explain a little bit where that 90% fits in? And because it looks to me like 980,000 here. Do you see where I'm looking? On page 4 of 190, next to the day column and the GAN column. And I think this is the form asked you
Right.
to complete this, and it forced the answer. But I was just trying to figure out.
How that ties to the attachment.
Right, and also how, and maybe I'm reading it wrong, but it looks like we exceeded program revenues by 28,000, but somehow 980 was 90% of that, or less of that.
I can answer the excess program revenues, because last year we didn't have a community day school.
Okay.
This is money that is owed back to the state, and we're holding on to it until they take it back.
Okay. All right.
That's one.
That's clear. Okay. And one of the other questions I have was, we're always thinking about property tax revenues, especially when we think we may be in basic aid. And it looks like we anticipated it would be more than it was. Is that right? Or how close were we on that? On page 5 of 190, under other local revenue, it's number 4 under A. The differential was 15.4%. Was that just a drop in property tax revenue? No.
No, I see what you're saying here.
I'm talking about the local revenues.
Those columns are looking at between our actuals and our upcoming budget, our 11-12 budget.
Right.
Okay. So those local revenues probably, let's see.
You're right, and I'm sorry.
I can look on
okay.
another page if you want to ask
Okay.
another question.
Yeah, no,
But you,
I'll stop
but you know
there.
it's probably a good thing to look at? If you go to page 8 of 190, the thing you always want to look at is income object 811, which is state aid. And if you look at, remember, we're combined districts in 1011, but if you look at 8011, we're at about 1.47 million. But now look over on the budget side.
right. I
That's
saw
the
that.
impact of the unification,
Right, I saw
driving
that.
you into revenue limit at a
Right.
significant rate. Now, what we don't know is, and I had many discussions with Board Member Parker about this, is what's going to be the disposition of the legislative reform to RDA and how the courts actually decide that. So we'd like to bring you some projections on that, but we can't until we know whether the courts are going to throw it out, whether they're going to sustain it. But if they did sustain it, we think we would be basic aid for this year only, and then be back in revenue limit, probably in perpetuity.
Okay. So that would be assuming that the RDA money came to us this year but might go away next.
It actually, under the normal operation of law, even if it's sustained, given the mechanism of how the legislation was drafted, we'd have like a one-time huge infusion, and then we'd get a lot less. But since we'd get a lot less, it won't push us over the top of the bucket. That's the best way to look at it.
Okay, I understand. Okay, thank you. You've answered my questions. Appreciate it.
Oh, Ms. Parker?
But I think that it is worthwhile to ask, when it's talking about other local revenue, what are the components of other local revenue? I mean, that isn't our property tax, what is it?
If you look on page 10, it breaks out the other local revenue. And usually this is because it's always less at adopted budget, because at first interim, we get all our donation accounts, we get all our money for the donation accounts. So that's when we increase in our restricted side. If you look in column B, down, all the way down at the bottom where it says all other local revenue, 8699, do you see that on the bottom? You'll see that it's about $500,000 difference right there. That's what we ended with in local donations, and we just book the revenue as we see it at that particular time for our adopted budget. But we do get more donations, and that number will grow.
You're booking it on a cash receipt basis.
Well, not real, yeah, basically, we don't anticipate that
Right.
donation account A will get the same as donation account A in 1112.
Right, so you're talking about things that come in like donations for auditoriums and fields and?
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is where the parcel tax is held, and
That's correct.
That's right.
That's up at the top part of the page 8.
And then other
page
local,
10.
you'd have things like rents and leases, civic center, all those type of things.
okay. I'm going to go
Okay.
ahead, if I may, and move to approve the 2010-11 fiscal year unaudited actuals.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? I just wanted to reiterate my appreciation for how remarkably accurate those numbers were. And I know that it reflects a great deal of work identifying what exactly should have gone into the calculation. So I want to really commend you and your staff for all the work that went into that.
Thank you.
Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 5-0. Okay. Item E4, acceptance of supplemental educational services, SES provider contracts. And this one, we will turn to Mr. Sumter.
Good evening, everyone. What you have before you is the recommendation for approval of the supplemental service providers, educational providers for our schools that are in program improvement year 2 or beyond. We currently in Santa Barbara Unified have 12 schools that meet the requirements, or at least they're in that category to receive those services. And we have received 31 contracts from providers for those services to be considered by our families. And we will conduct an SES fair for families to come and basically select their provider that they wish to use for those services during the year. We will have 2 fairs for the year for the same purpose, one in the fall and one in the spring, to allow for additional services or allow additional families to receive those services once they may discover that they may need them at that point. So what you see before you is at least the allocation that is set aside. We're required by No Child Left Behind to set aside 20% of our Title I funds for this purpose, and we have done so. And so we have been able to at least receive notification from these 31 providers to be considered for this option with our families. So the recommendation is that the board approve the supplemental education service provider contracts for the 2011-2012 school year.
Okay, any questions or comments from the board? No, this is
I'll move the,
pretty routine in terms of we do this every year.
I'll move the acceptance of supplemental education services provider contracts.
Do we have a second?
Second, and
Okay. Ms. Deacon?
I was in correspondence with Dr. Cash about this, and probably you were involved in providing some of these answers, but I thought it was useful for the rest of the board and for the public to know that we rarely, it sounds like we don't use all this money, that about half as many students
Right.
actually used it last year.
That's right. We had an amount enough to service 310 students for the year last year, and there were 114 who took advantage of the opportunity, so we did not use all of our funds.
And the other piece of that I was interested in was us trying to find some way about whether these services actually make a difference for the
Right.
students. And I know Dr. Cash suggested that maybe we'll look at their CSD scores
Right.
pre and post taking the advantage of these classes, because it would be nice to know if it really is helping.
Right, and since receiving your email, even just today, we've already established how we're going to go about doing that this year.
Thank you, appreciate that.
So the money that's set aside that is not used, does that, I guess my question is, when does that roll, I assume it rolls back into Title I, but when does it do that? I guess my question is, does it do it early enough in the year that we can reallocate it for something else?
Well,
Or does
that's
it end up just kind of falling into the ending balance?
That's a good question. I mean, I'd have to find out when that typically takes place, but I would assume it has to be available in the springtime when we have our fair there, so we know that we have it there to fund those students who do sign up. And then after that, then we can determine how much of it is used and what's left to return.
I
Ms.
can add a little
Waske?
clarity, yes. We do put it back in, it's reallocated. We have to keep in mind that we cannot have at the district office over 15%, 85% needs to go out to sites. And we have with federal funding until the end of September to spend it. So it's a little different calendar year there. So yeah, we make sure that we use it in very good ways for
Okay,
kids.
well, that's helpful to know. Thank you. Okay. Then, do we have a motion, don't we? Okay, sorry. I couldn't remember whether we had our motion or not. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 5-0. So we are at our conference agenda. Item F1, first reading of our discussion of the board and superintendent protocols. And Dr. Cash will introduce this topic and talk about the workshop that we had recently from which these derive.
Well, thank you very much. These are the protocols that we worked very diligently on September 2nd, most all of the day, facilitated by Dr. Rudy Castrita, who I thought did a wonderful job in really getting everyone to talk and share. And I discovered, not that I didn't know beforehand, but definitely a group that doesn't have any problem sharing. And that's a wonderful thing, especially when the protocols and operating procedures are about how we will communicate with each other and how we'll work together as a team. And one of the wonderful things about having a document like this is our ability then to present it to the public so that everyone understands how the governance team, which is the 5 elected board members and the superintendent, plan to work together and support student learning. So I personally wanted to, I don't have anything to say about anything specifically regarding each one, but thank each and every one of you for your hard work beforehand and during the meeting so that we could get to the point where we could have a draft of these protocols for a conversation. So with that, I'll leave it to you.
Okay, board members? Ms. Parker?
Well, I have some things to run through in the document itself, but I think that the first place I'd like to start with is where these protocols will go. Is it intended to replace the board bylaws 9005 and 9006?
No.
Because there's so much overlap between those two documents and this document that if it doesn't, we would need to look at 9005 and 9006 to realign them, or maybe just consolidate down, because a lot of CSBA doesn't really use 9006 anymore, the Code of Ethics. The 9005 is sort of standard CSBA package. So I think that whatever we come up with out of this, we need to talk about, because I do think it's important that we don't just adopt it, but that we bring it into the bylaws if we can, to make it really have the force of a policy and not just something that was adopted at one meeting, but something that's part of our bylaws. So I guess my question is, do we want to start running through? Should I bring up where I have marks on my document, or how do you want to do it, Mrs. Cordero?
Well, I think that probably would be the best. These are items that we all agreed to at the workshop. So I'm assuming that we're probably most of us are all in general agreement. So if there are specific, are most of your concerns, Ms. Parker, sort of
not too many.
language issues?
Yeah, just some language issues,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, so why don't we just run through them?
Okay, my first one was on page 2, number 2, where it's act with dignity and understand it says the implication, but the CSBA language is actually implications, the implications of demeanor and behavior. So if we could add an S after implication. And I'm looking because obviously some things were changed even from the one that we had. Oh, then number 21, and that was actually something that I brought up at the workshop, and I wasn't thinking about being parallel at that point, and what the board will do and what the superintendent do and how they're broken out. So I was trying to make something reciprocal there, but it doesn't work with everything else. So I would suggest that where it says at number 21, the language says the board and the superintendent will contact each other whenever contacted by the media. I would switch that to inform the superintendent whenever contacted by the media. So cross out everything up to whenever and replace it with inform the superintendent. And then address the reciprocal piece. So this is what it looks like here, inform the superintendent.
So take out,
The board and the superintendent will contact each other, take those out.
Okay.
So is the final language, the board will inform the
No,
superintendent?
it's
No, it
just
just starts with the verb.
inform the
So,
superintendent.
inform.
So it then matches all the other
Got it.
protocols that start with the verb. I also didn't really like the language on that on number 23, will not allow a matter to fester, just because it is also not, it doesn't fit in terms of the verb structure. And so my suggestion would be just to eliminate will not allow a matter to fester and instead say communicate one-on-one with the superintendent as soon as possible when an individual concern arises. Then my next one was on number 9 on page 5, where it's under the superintendent will list. It says provide useful data to the board members so data-driven decisions can be made. This is just my personal opinion, but data-driven decisions has become such a cliche that I thought it might be better to not use that phrase and instead say something like provide data or useful data and any other necessary information to board members to assist in their decision-making process.
I can't write that fast.
I've got it all in my notes, so I'm happy to.
Could you just say it again?
Mm-hmm. It was provide useful data and any other necessary information to board members to assist in their decision-making process. And then on number 12, this is where I was trying to reciprocate on the language from the board section. So where it says, members in a timely manner of any major incident, and I also didn't like the language, or when they may be called on to answer or explain, that doesn't sound quite right. So if we could get rid of, or when they may be called on to answer or explain, and change that to or when they may be contacted by the media on a particular issue.
Just by the media?
I'll take, I mean, this is where I was trying to match it up with the board protocol from the previous section, but, you know, it could be media or community, but I felt like that was covered in a later item where there's some, yeah, that was number 23, keep the board informed regarding issues and/or situations that could possibly concern parents, students, staff, or community.
Could you go back to your language? I'm sorry. Could you go back to your language on number 12, please?
So it would sound in total like this: inform the board prior to critical information becoming public, apprise all board members in a timely manner of any major incident, or when they may be contacted by the media on a particular issue.
I would prefer to leave out by the media.
Okay. Or when they may be questioned on a particular issue?
Great.
Okay.
Can I just ask, that's a pretty broad statement. Are we referring only to major incidents? Because I don't know if we're going to ask the superintendent to necessarily be able to know when they will need to inform us if we're contacted prior to the superintendent learning of a particular event.
Well, and we could almost leave it out entirely and just say major incident period, because number 23 covers so much, where it says keep the board informed regarding issues and/or situations that could possibly concern parents, students, staff, or community. I mean, that
Well,
covers.
I would prefer that, because I think the prior language for 12 was trying to do too much, so I'm fine at stopping at the end of major incident.
So just end it at major incident, put a period there, and get rid of everything after that. That's fine with me.
Okay, does anybody object to that?
Well,
Ms. Lamone?
the only thing about that is that then it does lose the essence of what it was trying to do. There is no reciprocity as far as the media piece, because I think that the piece for the board was about, on a particular media issue,
He's gonna,
we need to
we're
let
supposed to let him know.
and vice versa. So I see where we're going with this, but then I actually feel that there's not anything that actually addresses.
Well, yes, but I don't think, my feeling was that language didn't really do it anyways, because the reciprocity is that we would be, the board is saying we will apprise the superintendent whenever we are going to be making statements to the media. And so to be reciprocal, it should be saying the superintendent will advise us whenever he is going to be making statements to the media. But what it was actually saying is, will apprise us whenever we might have to make another statement to the media.
So then my thought is that we should say, well, the superintendent should apprise us when he's going to be making major statements to the media, because I'm going to guess you talk to the media a lot more, but I think some of the major things, but then major is pretty big.
But I'm also wondering if we can include that in 23 instead of 12, where it says, keep the board informed. That has that sentence. We could have a second sentence that says, inform the board of, I'm trying to think of the words, but I'm trying to remember what the language was from the previous one. Inform the board whenever contacted by the media, or not whenever, I would guess it'd be inform the board when contacted by the media regarding a major incident, event or agenda item.
That clearly would be reciprocal.
That would make sense. Yeah.
You want to replace number 12 with something that, like 21 on the board protocols, that just substitutes the word superintendent. Inform the board whenever contacted by the media regarding an incident, event, or agenda item.
Yeah, let's see.
See, I don't think that the superintendent needs to contact us.
I don't either.
For every time, I mean, every meeting, I'm sure you're contacted by something, about something on the agenda.
There are lots of media in Santa Barbara.
Yeah. So I think what we're trying to get to is when it's sort of exceptional.
Yeah.
More critical,
I mean, when we need
The
to
no
know.
surprises
Yeah, the
piece.
no
And-
surprises, when we need to know something's gonna be.
I
in
think
the
number
media.
12 with that deletion of the, everything after the or, I mean, any major incident, I mean, I don't care where it's coming from, media or not, I would expect to be, this 12 would let us know.
And if for some reason my understanding of major is different than yours, I'm certain and counting on you letting me know.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, I'm willing to accept 12 the way it has been revised.
I am-
To just
I am
end it
too.
after
I am
incident.
too. And can we, while we're on this, go back to 21 then, on the board
Oh, on
side? Inform the superintendent whenever contacted by the media. I mean, say, for instance, we're here at a meeting, and a member of the media comes up and asks us for a quote on something we've just discussed. I mean, we're not necessarily going to have to tell you every time something like that happens. I mean, I guess I'm trying to get at where we,
I think there's an
point.
understanding that if I'm in the room, that I'll know you're being contacted by the media.
okay. Thanks.
Okay, Ms. Parker, did you have more?
I think I had a couple small things. Number
Okay.
17, and that might have been a typo before. Yeah, this was just getting rid of the dash in update and making it an update. And then on number 18, present major decisions initially as a discussion item, then place them on a future board agenda for action. So that's replacing it with them, and then the next with future. And thank you to Ms. Deacon and Mr. Herron for catching 22 and 24 that we'd already agreed would be deleted. I had put question marks next to them going, did we want these? So, and thanks to Ms. Hall for getting the,
Can I ask a question on 18 that you just
Certainly.
changed?
Mr. Herron?
I mean, does that take precedent over the possible, in our bylaws, that we can waive the second reading if we want to? I mean, this one sort of says.
Oh,
we're gonna-
yes,
We're going to discuss it, and then the next board agenda, but we have the right to adopt something at the time we discuss it. Does this change that?
I had really seen that as being about major decisions, like this is sort of like no surprises to the community.
Correct.
This is about, this is not about a board policy that's minor, or, we would never, it's the difference between, are we going to meet 2 meetings or 3 meetings in a month versus are we going to close to inter-district transfers? I mean,
Okay.
they're both policies, but I think major is the key word there.
Thank you.
is that satisfactory? Because I want to make sure, I'm interpreting it the same way as Ms. Parker, but I want to make sure that we're all interpreting it that way, because I agree with Mr. Herron. I don't want to, interfere with our ability to sometimes act on a first reading.
Yeah, I'm just worried about the future. Somebody will put this in front of us and say, you just did something you shouldn't have done because protocol says you shouldn't have. But we have the bylaws that say we can.
Yes.
Yes.
Guess major's in the
Okay.
eye of the beholder
Um,
sometimes.
Well, and I actually.
I'm wondering if we could add something like routinely or as routine or whenever possible or something like that to give us that little wiggle room that Mr. Herron is looking for.
Well, and I actually understood this more about the relationship between the board and the superintendent, and this part, they do mention the public, but I think we have actually F3, where there's more specific on what we do place and not place on the agenda. So I didn't interpret this as a protocol related to our meetings per se, but as a protocol related to the relationship and communication between the board and the superintendent.
Well,
So we might see it, I'm sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
Well, this is under the heading, the superintendent will, as opposed to action taken by the board, say, to move a policy on a first reading. I mean, this is asking the superintendent.
Yeah, that's a good
Oh,
clarification, actually.
that is
Yes.
that's a very helpful
So in other words, the
clarification.
superintendent, I will not be putting on an action item that you have not thoroughly discussed.
Right.
Okay.
You can hold me to that protocol.
That's a very helpful
Good
clarification, thank you.
clarified context.
Okay, any further? Mr. Herron?
Just a couple, on page 3, number 14, I've seen this change on one draft, but it's not on this draft that was in front of us. I thought we added in 14 personal recommendations for principal and above. I'm not sure where those words disappeared, but
We did add that.
they were in one of the emails we got today from Mimi changing it. Understand the superintendent's role to make personnel recommendations for principals and above and changes in consultation, recommendations and changes for principal and above in consultation with the board. I think what we talked about it, there's a lot of recommendations you do,
Right.
and we're not involved in them.
And that's, I do remember that conversation now.
Yeah, and
That
that,
is accurate.
and that was in one of, in the
That was in
revisions that you,
was in the
you
revision
and,
that Susan and
you
I
and
had
Susan
sent
sent,
to
right.
Mimi. So I'm not sure where,
And I think the problem, based on my discussion with Mimi, was there were a lot of documents that were all named the same, and so when changes got
Yeah.
made, she wasn't always sure which one they'd
Well,
been
I've got
made.
it.
okay,
Copy
so
right
we'll
here
just
that
put
I
that
can
back in.
Okay. And I just had one other that bothers me a little bit, number 24. Cast a vote on all matters except when a conflict of interest arises. I know from a personal standpoint, I did abstain on a matter that I didn't want to vote yes or no on. Just, and if this forces me to vote yes or no, then I guess I don't like it.
I think this was one of the things that I had brought up also at the meeting, that, that Robert's Rules of Order, which we have traditionally operated under, and I think our bylaws even say that we will, identifies that abstentions should only be made in the instance of a conflict of interest, not as a way of avoiding voting yes or no.
I'm not sure of that interpretation. I'd have to see it to believe it. And because our bylaws used to say if you abstain, it's treated as a yes.
Well,
But
that's,
that was taken out of our bylaws, I believe. Mrs. Parker, you might know that.
I know that we discussed it. I don't know that we took it out. Can't remember what the final decision was on it, so.
I
Maybe you can find out by the next meeting when this comes back to us.
thought I recollected that we,
I thought it was kept in, and it was a
yeah,
a
that we, I
a
thought
legal
we changed,
interpretation.
we changed the language, but not the process, in that, I think it used to say it would be noted as something like agreement with the
Board majority.
the board majority, and we changed it so it wasn't saying they agreed, but just that it would be counted as
Okay.
a vote in the majority.
I'll research it.
But we can check it, because I may be, certainly may be incorrect too.
Can I just chime in on this one, too? Mr. Heron, you don't abuse this practice, but I'm concerned that in the future, it could potentially be abused, and you could have someone who routinely abstained because they didn't want to take a position one way or the other, even when a conflict of interest didn't arise. So I actually liked it for that reason, because I thought it kind of made people take a stand.
Well, in the case I can think of, my voting no would have sent a message I didn't want to send. But I didn't approve of what was actually happening the way it was happening. And so I didn't want to vote yes, because that then says I approve of it. So it just, at that one, it didn't feel right for me to vote yes or no. And it obviously that hasn't happened once in 3 years, so.
And I would just chime in that I think that where I see boards and councils sometimes abuse it is in the budgeting process, which was not what your concern was at all, I believe, at the time. But it's about, nobody wants to make nasty budget cuts, so I'll abstain, I'll be the good guy and have everybody else on the board be responsible for having to lay off people and, when you're in a budget cut situation. And I just don't think we want to have wiggle room on that for board members, but this is also, I think, it's a protocol. It doesn't mean that every single time we're going to be able to follow every single protocol, and there may be ones where our own consciences push us in a different direction,
Okay.
and I hope there would be understanding of that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, I want to reiterate also that I think in the example that you're giving, Mr. Herron, that was not the kind of incident that this was intended to avoid. It was more the type that Ms. Parker was describing,
Thank you.
where there was a sort of a political reason for not wanting to vote rather than one of conscience.
Thank you. I can understand that totally.
Having worked in a district where a board member routinely did that on budget matters and seen how it impacted the reelection campaign, I can understand that.
Okay, so are there any other? Okay. Yeah, oh, I'm sorry.
Can
Ms.
I,
Deacon?
and this is not a specific item, but I just wanted to say in general, having reread these, I'm really pleased with them. I want to make sure that we think about implementation, because I think we're going to have to change some old habits. And I think two-way feedback will be a good thing as we go through the process of kind of transitioning so that they're fully implemented. And so I would just like to encourage two-way communication and have board tell staff and staff tell board, wait a minute, remember the protocols. I mean, I don't know if it'll come to that, but I don't mind being reminded, and I hope it would be taken as a constructive criticism if I reminded someone on the other side. So that was just the point I wanted to make.
Okay. Any further discussion of these? Okay, I just wanted to note how appreciative I was of the spirit in which our workshop took place. A real spirit of cooperation and desire to create a positive and strong working environment for our new superintendent and for the board. So I think I think the public would be very pleased if they knew what a very positive relationship we all are striving to create, because I think it really benefits the working of the district. Mr.
I would
Herron?
just like to reaffirm that it was a public meeting, and the public could have been there.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Okay, we will move on then to item F2, discussion of board bylaw, 9320, meetings and notices. And Mr. Herron, I believe this came at your request.
Yes. Our board bylaws call for a meeting on the fifth Tuesday in those months where there is a fifth Tuesday. And I understand the intent, and somebody will, I'm sure, verify or not, that it was under a time period where there was a lot of work to be done and just everything was behind time and we needed an extra meeting maybe to catch up, which I think is fine. But in the current environment, going back for this year, calendar year, and last calendar year, there were 8 such fifth Tuesdays. 4 of them were canceled because of spring break, summer break, holidays. 1 was canceled by us to do interviews for a new superintendent. 2 had very short agendas and were not urgent. 1 was a normal meeting agenda, but the policy reviews were put off until a special meeting. It just seems to me that that fifth Tuesday, if we need an extra meeting during the year, let's call an extra meeting during the year. But work expands to the time we allocate to it, and the last 2 years have shown we don't need that as a regular meeting. It just caused extra paperwork to cancel it 4 times or 5 times. I'm happy with workshops. I'm happy with study sessions. I'm happy with extra meetings. I just don't want to have in the bylaws something that has not been useful for 2 years. And that's why I made the suggestion.
Okay, and I had a question. I apologize if this seems obvious to everybody else, but the board policy that we have, or the board bylaw that we have in our packet, has the fifth Tuesday crossed out. So was this your draft?
This was my draft.
Okay, because,
Doctored up nicely by somebody.
okay, because it didn't say anywhere that this was a draft.
It's page 1 of 5 it's my
Yes.
recommendations that
And so I
I,
kept thinking, did we change this when I wasn't looking?
No, no, this is-
Okay,
somebody took my document and
okay, okay.
made it nice.
All right, so thank you very much for that clarification. So I'm not hearing resounding opposition to your proposal here.
Oh, and one other thing. It saves the staff 3 or 4 nights
Yes,
a
it does.
year that they can be with their family.
Yes, I agree, I agree. So,
And that was going to be my comment too, and not just evenings, but there's a lot of time that goes into preparing for a meeting, and staff time is valuable. I would rather it be spent on focusing on student achievements instead of putting together documents for us.
yes, and I want to reiterate that this is not precluding having a meeting on the 5th Tuesday.
Not at all.
If we believe that it's necessary and there are agenda items that we need to take care of, we can certainly call a special meeting. But we just won't make it routine, so
And
that
I-
it'll only happen when we need it.
And I would like to point out that most of our workshop special meetings are during the day.
Yes,
You know, we very seldom call a special meeting for nighttime.
yes. Although I would like to suggest that if we are going to call a special board meeting, that we should maintain probably the evening hours to allow public to participate in those meetings. Okay, at any rate, we can have that discussion at a future time. But I think it sounds like, by and large, we are in agreement with this suggestion, and we'll have it come back to us on another agenda for
I would,
approval if we
I would
need
say
to.
if Mr.
However,
Herron
wants to make
know,
a
I was just
motion.
gonna
I
say
would
that.
like to move that we make a bylaw change, board bylaw change on regular meetings as spelled out on page 1 of 5 on the agenda, changing or eliminating the regular meeting on the 5th Tuesday of each month.
I'll second that.
So as we just clarified, we can sometimes act on the conference agenda. So there's motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 5-0. Okay, that brings us to the end of our agenda. We do not need to go back to the consent agenda. We took care of that one that was pooled already. Are there any additional announcements of coming events? No? 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 Okay. I'm sorry. I will make a quick announcement of a coming event. The Adelante Charter School is hosting a dinner dance this coming Friday in the auditorium of Franklin School in honor of El 16 de Septiembre, the Mexican Independence Day. And it is a fundraiser for Adelante. It really promises to be quite an entertaining evening, I think. They will be having student performances at the outset. They will be having a dinner, and then they will be having a Zumba demonstration, so you can see some really exciting dancing. Then there will also be a cumbia contest, so there will be prizes for the best dancers, and there will be DJs. So it sounds, and all to be had for $8, and a great program to be supporting. So for those of you who have no plans for this Friday, or plans that are easily canceled and changed, Adelante is anxious to have as many people there as possible.
One thing, this coming Saturday, United Way has their annual Day of Giving, and many of our schools are participating with needs. So any of the public watching this, it'll be too late.
Yeah, I think they'll see
Any
it
of the
after the
public
day.
watching this in the way of news media, the Day of Giving by United Way will benefit many of our schools, and anybody that can participate would be more than welcome, I'm sure.
Yes, yes. Okay, future agenda items? I think I'm sorry, Mr. Herron.
I'm not sure in what context I would put this, whether it's not necessarily an agenda meeting, but it's more factual, just for information. We did approve 3 contracts today with 3 different educational entities for master teachers. And in reading them, you know, one was for 4 years, one was for 5 years, some were for $100, $200, $350. One was forever. When it goes on until somebody says no. I guess I would like to know, how many of these contracts do we have? Is there a norm as to what they should be paid? Has that amount that they pay changed over the years? Should we have some kind of policy that says if we sign one of these contracts, it will be for X number of years and it will be for compensation of X and will be reviewed annually? The contract now says one of them is for, I think, $200 for the next 5 years or 4 years. I mean, is that good basic policy? Are we looking at these things in the context of uniformity, norms? I have no idea, but it is something that I'd like to know more about.
Okay, so I would like to maybe suggest or request from staff that we get a report along the lines that we used to get in the board brief, updating us on what types of contracts we have and what the sort of, if the range of agreements that we have, if there is no norm, or if there is a norm, what the norm is.
And who decides where the...
And so a lot of this information that Mr. Herron has requested, and then once the board has a chance to see that report, we can determine whether we want to request that it be placed on an agenda for us to have fuller discussion regarding the need for a policy, et cetera, if there is one. Okay, so is that clear enough direction? Okay, thanks. Okay, anything else? All right, then I guess that brings us to adjournment. A full hour early.